hello to the almost lunch crowd. I do not have slides with me, but if I did have a slide, there would only be one, and it would say ditto. So ditto to what they said, what you said, what she said, what he said, as we're heading into the sort of 36th hour. I will just say much of it again. In January, I was standing in a long line for my $5 coffee at Atticus, which is the bookstore at the bottom of Main Street. Yeah, exactly, Atticus. It's the only place you can get coffee, right? It's at the bottom of Main Street in Park City, Utah. And as some of you may know, long lines and high prices are integral to the Sundance Film Festival. So I saw a journalist I know, she'd buried in a couch, kind of phone tucked under her ear. This journalist is not a film critic. She broke one of the most important news stories of the decade. I'd been on the margins of that story as it unfolded, and I knew that she was reluctant to have that reporting be part of a film. And when I say reluctant, I mean she was vehemently opposed, stonewalling, speaking out on social media, refusing interviews, unimpressed with Hollywood, dismissive of complex characters, emotional resonance, point of view, and especially nuanced storytelling. In fact, pretty dismissive of storytelling altogether. So naturally, I love her. And her stance is one that I know I'm quite familiar with having worked with journalists over many years. So I didn't even think she'd turn up to the festival. And as I went over to say hi, I sort of braced myself for the litany of complaints I was sure that would come, which was, it's cold, it's crowded, and the film is ruining my reporting. She beamed. It's incredible, she said. So many people are talking about the big issues at stake. We can really reach people with this film, so new reporting lands and people can receive it in a new way and take action. I'm thinking we should actually make some more films, maybe some shorts, a series, and do you think I should talk to Netflix? So I walked out of Atticus with my $5 skinny double shot latte in hand and texted a friend of ours who knew the backstory. Movie magic strikes again. Magic. This group here, I think we've learned over the last few days, thanks to Katie and Varsha's incredible curating, that there's a lot of magic here in this room, and that like the artists we support at Sundance, many of you are magicians, wizards, spellcasters, making magic not only with movies, but with stories of all kinds, and with the narratives built of stories made of songs, Snapchat, sitcoms, and with the culture that emerges from those narratives as they concatenate one narrative linked to the next. And our philosopher friends at the Culture Group, who many of you know and have worked with, compare stories to stars, narratives to constellations, culture to galaxies, each one made of the other. Many here, too, are spell breakers of tired tropes, of racist depictions, of female characters who don't speak or act, of what Ramel Ross, who Kara also referred to, he's the director of Hale County this evening, what Ramel calls the struggle narrative that permits only struggle and only out of poverty. Or of what the director and sound editor Jim Lebrecht, whose work you will soon be seeing on a screen next year, I believe, calls inspiration porn, reserved for people with disabilities on screen. So I'll drop the magic metaphor for now, not least because my Sundance colleague, Kamal Sinclair, has written an epic report on this topic called Making a New Reality, supported by Just Films and Sundance Institute. Now that's a literal title, Making Reality, not making illusion, not making magic. Kamal writes, story and narrative are the code for humanity's operating system. We have used stories to communicate knowledge, prescribe behavior, and imagine our futures since our earliest days. Story and narrative inform how we design everything from technology to social systems. They shape the norms in which we perform our identities, even perhaps the mutations of our DNA and perceptions of reality. Stories are the first step in the process of how we imagine our reality. They literally make our reality. Kamal documents this process in case after case. For better, and worse. She describes, for example, how the 2002 film Minority Report, remember Tom Cruise, the production designer for Minority Report facilitated a collaborative design process to imagine the film's near future city. 100 real-world patents came out of that process. Kamal notes how the 1980s films War Games and Revenge of the Nerds, among others, wrote women out of the script, though they'd been active in the early days of computer engineering. She connects this lack of narrative presence to real-world toxic workplaces and bias code. In Kamal's words, these are the high stakes of limited inclusion. That is why, Kamal argues, artists must be at the table. And as the saying goes, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. And we actually take this very seriously at Sundance, and in fact, that's been true for 40 years. That is the purpose, the mission of this organization. And now, under Carrie Putnam's leadership, we're going deeper in our mission to support independent artists. And part of that mission is realized through our evolving impact and engagement strategy, which supports artists as they bring their work into the world with the aim of reaching particular audiences and making specific impact, of which we just heard incredible examples earlier. But also the Institute's own public engagement with different audiences and communities worldwide on behalf of and in support of and advocating for artists as the leaders that Kara talked about earlier, and as integral to this ecosystem that we've been hearing about for the last 2 days. We're really early days on this, so I'm really looking forward to discussion and debate with all of you here, but also going forward. There are 3 organizing principles that we're working with that are undergirding our impact and engagement strategy: independence, inclusion, and interdependence. So first, independence. Just to reiterate, because there haven't been not as much focus on the artists yet, the individual artist continues to remain at the center of Sundance programs. These programs are in fact organized around Sundance core belief that artists are a vital force in creating an engaged and informed society, and not only engaged and informed, but in literally making the reality of our society. We begin by listening. Detroit Narrative Agency recently reminded me of this adage from the Allied Media Conference. And at Sundance, we begin by listening to artists. And what we've been hearing lately is that artists move across discipline and deploy whatever form best serves their vision in the story, the idea they're exploring, or the question they're asking. So while our impact and engagement work remains rooted in the documentary form, we're expanding to support artists working in other disciplines and forms. That's fiction for us, fiction feature, theater, emerging media most importantly, and even a bit of radio and live performance, which we also support, shorts, features, episodic installations. And while that's not sort of unusual for this room, I think we're finding that it's being very warmly received, but it's unusual in some other spaces. So our programs reflect both this belief about the artist's societal role and the breadth of how artists are making meaning in the world. The second is inclusion, a major topic yesterday, and I think Bridget really helpfully reminded us of the limits of the concept of inclusion. I guess we're like the old kind of grandmama here at 40 plus, we're sort of back still in inclusion. So the Institute is committed, not us, but like Sundance. Sundance is 40, not us. What? Talk for yourself, right. The Institute is committed to deepening support of traditionally underrepresented creators, prioritizing women, people of color, LGBTQ, and people with disabilities. So we've been releasing demographic data on submissions and acceptances to our signature programs. And the question that your graduate student asked yesterday about access, I think is in that data. Hey, go look at the data. The data. I think you'll know what's in that data, but it's quite revealing because it tells you quite a bit about the pipeline, which is there. So we've been releasing that data, and at the festival this year, we launched the Press Inclusion Initiative with support of some people here in the room, which resulted in 43% of the press corps coming from these traditionally underrepresented groups. Now, that is not to congratulate ourselves. We simply listened to artists, Boots Riley and Tessa Thompson, who were in Sorry to Bother You that year, who noted the obvious and zoned in on our blind spots. Third, interdependence. So no one's going it alone in this work. Partnership is necessary. Just as one of several examples, we're in our 11th year of a partnership with Skoll Foundation and Stories of Change, which as a result of the work of many in this room, and particularly MIT Open Doc Lab, is now focusing on collaborative practices and co-creation between storytellers and social entrepreneurs. We're in our first year of a new partnership with Luminate, who are committed to building stronger societies and understand the power of story in a global context, which for us is incredibly important because Sundance operates out of the US but works globally. So these are just some of the creative partnerships that form nodes of a network. I just want to end by saying, interdependence is a principle, yes, but it's also a necessity, and that's because what I call our impact infrastructure, which is a phrase that in working with Perspective Fund, I started to think made some sense, and then after that read about narrative infrastructure with Color of Change, and I listened to Kara talking about the 21st century infrastructure to support social justice storytelling. What I'm calling our impact infrastructure is in fact like Swiss cheese at this point. It's kind of like the New York City subway system. It's full of holes, there's delays, there's inaccessible points, like the wide swaths of Queens are completely unavailable. There's no service. So the network of creative partnerships that we and others are doing is patching, it's undergirding, but it's undergirding what is in fact, I would argue, a shaky impact infrastructure in our field, despite the emerging and growing work that's been happening in many strong and robust institutions and organizing. So I would suggest, in the spirit I think that Benjamin said yesterday, of saying kind of what we might need. What the artists at Sundance Support need, we believe, is for us to build out that infrastructure, to realize all the creative possibilities that we've been talking about, all the new realities those artists imagine. For example, one of the holes we could patch would be to build out a nimble, issue-agnostic, responsive impact fund for projects, artists, and communities at all stages worldwide, serving the whole field. Something that Beatty mentioned at the festival this year. It doesn't really exist at scale, which is, I think, nuts. Another example, let's train and deploy a global network of impact strategists, impact producers, close to the ground in relevant communities. We know it works, hasn't been done. Now, a slightly bigger hole, like huge, gaping, San Andreas Fault hole, is that we need a public interest internet for non-commercial, independent distribution, curated not by algorithm, but by human rhythm, with data ethics baked in, and a point that Nancy Schwartzman importantly raised yesterday and that we haven't really talked about. Those are just part of this infrastructure that we're trying to build to support this incredible creative richness. So I'll just end by saying that those of you who know the inimitable Tabitha Jackson, who's my Sundance boss lady, she has a way with quotes. So I'm gonna end with two quotes. The first is from James Baldwin, and the second is from Audre Lorde. Here's James Baldwin. The purpose of art is to lay bare the questions that have been hidden by the answers. It's so good, I just have to say it again, right? It's like, the purpose of art is to lay bare the questions that have been hidden by the answers. The kind of change we need and the scale at which we need it requires not single questions or answers, but a network of them. And to that point, in 1982, prescient as she was, Audre Lorde said, "There's no such thing as a single issue struggle because we do not live single issue lives. Stories of climate change are stories of women's education. Stories of migration are stories of banking systems. Stories of mass incarceration are stories of settler colonialism. And the complexity of our lived experience and of this planet of story stars and narrative constellations and culture galaxies require not single stories, as Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie has said quite famously, but nor single issue stories, but precisely the kind of many-layered, complex character, genre-bending, nuanced, strong point of view, emotionally resonant, visual justice meaning-making that my Sundance Film Festival journalist found in movie magic. So thank you.